This is Bot City, and I'm Jet West. Today on the show, a heated clash between David Sachs and Anthropic over claims that CEO Dario Amodei refused to address a critical security flaw, allegations the company flatly denies ever happened. Anthropic's two most powerful AI models are offline right now, not because they failed, not because of a bug. They're offline because Amazon's CEO picked up a phone, called the White House, and said there was a problem. Anthropic said there wasn't. One of those parties was wrong, and the models are still dark. So which one is it? Because if you've been reading the coverage, you've been handed two completely different official explanations for why this happened. And nobody in the press is pressing either party on the contradiction. Let me walk you through what's actually in front of us, because the gap between the two stories is the story. Here's what we know. In April, Anthropic launched a model called Mythos. At launch, the company itself, on its own website, in its own voice, described the model as strikingly capable. They restricted access at launch, select customers only. The reason they gave, in their own words, was that Mythos can surpass human cybersecurity experts at finding and exploiting computer vulnerabilities. That is the company that built the thing filing a public capability warning about its own product. That doesn't happen. Labs do not, as a rule, ship a model alongside a note that says, by the way, this one can outperform our species at breaking into things. Anthropic did. That is the baseline. Hold on to it. Earlier last week, Anthropic released Fable 5. Fable 5 is the consumer version of Mythos with guardrails specifically designed to prevent the cybersecurity exploitation use case. Think of it as the same engine with a governor on it. Friday, the Trump administration issued a directive. Anthropic was instructed to restrict both Mythos and Fable 5 to U.S. citizens only, which, read carefully, would have prohibited Anthropic's own foreign national employees from using the company's own models. That is not a routine export control. That is a structural requirement for internal workforce segregation at a frontier AI lab. Anthropic looked at compliance, looked at what compliance would actually require, and pulled both models off the market entirely. The AP is calling it the most significant step the US government has ever taken to restrict access to a frontier AI model. I believe them. Now, why did this happen? Pick your adventure. Story 1 comes from David Sachs, the administration's AI guy, on X over the weekend. Sachs says Dario Amodei was notified about a jailbreak in Fable 5. A jailbreak in this context means a technique to strip the guardrails off the consumer model and unlock the full Mythos cybersecurity capability underneath. Sachs says Amodei looked at it, called it not a serious risk, and refused to fix it. The export controls in this telling are a reluctant response to a safety failure. Anthropic, the safety company, choosing the consumer product over safety. That's the quote. That's the framing. Story 2 comes from Semaphore's reporting. Semaphore's sources frame the action as driven by suspicion that a China-linked group accessed Mythos, national security, foreign adversary, distillation risk, which I'll come back to. Completely different trigger, completely different agency posture, completely different reason the models are offline. And then story 3, which is the one nobody is repeating loudly enough, Anthropic spokesperson on the record says the White House did not raise Chinese access in their conversations about the jailbreak and the export controls. Did not raise it. So Semaphore's national security framing and Anthropic's account of what was actually discussed in the room do not line up. And Sachs' safety framing and Semaphore's national security framing do not line up. 3 accounts, same week, same models. None of them agree on why this happened. And then there's Amazon. According to a person close to the White House, Andy Jassy personally contacted members of the administration to flag the jailbreak. Amazon spokesperson, when asked, confirmed that governments sometimes seek their counsel on security risks and then decline to discuss specifics. That is what is known in the trade as a non-denial structured as a denial. It is the press release equivalent of looking at the ceiling. Stop and look at what that means. Amazon is Anthropic's largest investor. Amazon is Anthropic's primary cloud partner. Anthropic runs on AWS. And the allegation, sourced thinly but consistently, is that Anthropic's biggest investor and infrastructure provider used its government access to trigger an action that took its investees' two most powerful consumer products off the market. The press is treating this as a sidebar, a line in paragraph 6. A guy made a call, moving on. It is not a sidebar. The business logic of that move is the question of the week, and nobody is asking it. Was this a good faith safety report? Was it a liability hedge, Amazon protecting itself from being the hosting provider on a model that gets used to break into infrastructure? Was it competitive? Amazon has its own model ambitions. Anthropic just lost its two best products from the US consumer market for the foreseeable future. Pick whichever motive you like. Any of them is a story. The silence on it is the tell. And while we're tallying things the coverage is not explaining, the distillation risk. Semaphore mentions it, nobody unpacks it. So here, an adversary with API access to a frontier model can hammer it with queries, harvest the input-output pairs at scale, and use those pairs to train a cheaper, locally controlled approximation. You don't need to steal the weights. You don't need to break into the data center. You just need to be a paying customer with patience and compute. That is why inference-level access is a national security concern now, in a way it wasn't 5 years ago. The old export control frameworks were built for hardware and source code. They do not map onto a world where the capability leaks through the front door, one API call at a time. That is the new surface area. That is what Washington is trying to figure out how to police. And on the substance, the concern is real. Which brings us to the G7. Friday night, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney spent 45 minutes on the phone with Emmanuel Macron talking about AI. Sunday, in Ireland, ahead of the summit, Carney used the Mythos and Fable shutdown explicitly, by name, as a case study in dangerous AI dependency. His quote, "The situation we're in collectively right now with Mythos and Fable is something that can happen with over-reliance on certain models. You'll hear me say this over and over again. It is never a good idea to have one option. Carney runs an economy where more than 70% of exports go to the United States. He has set a goal of doubling non-US exports inside a decade. He is at a G7 summit where AI is on the formal agenda Monday night, and he is citing a single US company's product removal as the working example of why allied nations need to stop depending on the American AI stack. That is the moment a domestic tech policy story crosses into allied nation strategic planning. That happened over the weekend, while most of the coverage was still arguing about whether Sachs' ex post was accurate. So, the payoff. Back to the question. Why are these models actually offline? The honest answer is that all three official stories are partially true and none of them are complete. There probably was a jailbreak. Amazon probably did flag it. The administration probably does have concerns about Chinese access through inference, even if they did not raise that specific concern with Anthropic in the room. And Anthropic, faced with a directive that would have required them to bar their own foreign national engineers from touching their own product, made the only call available to them, which was to pull the models entirely. That last move tells you everything about how operationally impossible the compliance ask actually was. You don't yank your two best products off the shelf on a Friday afternoon if there's any other lever to pull. The model is the story Anthropic warned us about. The company filed the warning themselves in April in plain language. They told us Mythos could outperform human experts at finding ways into systems. 8 weeks later, their biggest investor used that exact warning as ammunition with the White House, and the administration used it to issue the most restrictive AI export control on record. Anthropic wrote the capability statement that ended up being the legal predicate for shutting their own model down. Be careful what you publish on launch day. Somebody is reading it.
I'm Jet West in Bot City. Keep bussin'.
Grab news. Thomas.